Hey guys, Paul here from Military History Gear Review, and today we're going to be checking out the secret weapon of the North Vietnamese Army. This enabled them to take down the largest and most high-tech army of the entire era. So what was their secret? Well, stick around and we're going to find out. Alright, so what was the North Vietnamese secret weapon in the war against the United States? Well, to understand it, first we have to understand the North Vietnamese strategy going into this war. So, as you probably know, the North Vietnamese wanted to win a war of attrition against the United States. That meant that they wanted the US to expend a lot of manpower and a lot of resources until eventually they just simply ran out or lost the political will to fight. Now, Americans think that this means that they needed to expend 10 troops or take 10 casualties to get just one US casualty. But that's not the case. The North Vietnamese understood that the US had more manpower and frankly probably and much better technology. And so, instead, they relied on being very, very careful, extremely discretionary with how they used their manpower and their resources. That isn't to say that the North Vietnamese weren't willing to sacrifice lives to achieve their objectives. They were, but they chose to do so very, very deliberately. To give you an idea of just how careful they were about when they fought, the typical North Vietnamese soldier reported that he had just 2 contacts with US troops in a typical year in combat. The rest of the time was spent maneuvering through the jungle, gathering intelligence on possible targets for attack, and carefully positioning themselves so that the US forces would spend the maximum amount of time trying to chase them down, encountering booby traps, expending resources, and taking casualties. And so given that, in almost every situation, the North Vietnamese army, when they did meet the US forces, were able to withdraw and melt away into the jungle. But there's one piece of US technology that the North Vietnamese could never escape, and that was the B-52 heavy bombers. The US ruled the air during the Vietnam War, and the North Vietnamese could do nothing to stop it. That meant that those North Vietnamese ground troops were under constant threat of B-52 bombers, F-4 Phantoms, attack helicopters, all sorts of things in the US air arsenal. And so to mitigate that, they had only one tool that worked. This is a Chinese copy, a modern Chinese copy, of a Soviet entrenching tool. As you can see, it's got a lacquer handle that extends all the way halfway down the spade. The spade is only slightly concave and it has a bladed edge all the way around. But really, there's nothing special about this. This is almost unchanged since the First World War, maybe even before. But what made the North Vietnamese so incredible with it is how they were able to use it. See, they became experts at digging foxholes. And anyone that's been in the military knows that digging foxholes is really an art. And the North Vietnamese were second to none. They would, by digging foxholes every single time they stopped, they were able to always be prepared to weather B-52 strikes or other air power attacks. So a typical North Vietnamese soldier would stop for the night and, having been trained to dig in total darkness and in total silence, they would use their entrenching tool to dig typically a 4-foot deep trench with a smaller trench off to the side that was only about 2 feet deep that they could hunker down, squat down, and hide inside with a small ceiling of earth above them. The result was that they had a position where they could stand up and fight in, and still, when B-52 strikes were nearby, they would squat down and hide in the little mini trench within their trench. That meant that when the bombs did hit, that the deadly shrapnel that they would expend would either fly overhead, or if it did get inside, would just embed in the earth and not in their smaller trench because it was off to the side. While it's still true that a B-52 strike was, if it was a direct hit, there was nothing you could do about it. You were going to die. But it meant that anything other than a direct hit, you had an excellent chance of surviving. And that made B-52s, while they were still incredibly feared by the North Vietnamese, just managed to be survivable. Now, not only did the North Vietnamese have individual fighting positions, but they were able to dig even more elaborate setups with their entrenching tools for things like their command and control centers, their hospitals, and other high-value areas. And they did that by digging tunnels into the earth. These would be multi-story, multi-room facilities embedded in hillsides. Not only were these invisible to overhead flights, but they were totally protected from airstrikes. Now, the North Vietnamese soldiers would not do all this work themselves. They had a network operating within South Vietnam who would impress local civilians and non-combatants to do some of the digging. And so often they would arrive at these sites and they would already be more than halfway finished. The other advantage to using local labor was that there's nothing suspicious in a highly agrarian nation about seeing an old man, a young child, a woman carrying a small spade going off into the fields or into the jungle. And so nothing was ever seen as amiss, even though they were digging giant fighting positions. Right? So as you can see, by innovatively using just a small, simple tool, the North Vietnamese were able to mitigate the effects of the US most deadly arsenal. So, we've talked about why this is so great, but we need to field test it. So don't go anywhere. All right, I gotta make 2 stakes to stake down my tarp for the night. Let's see if we can put this bad boy to use. All right, let's see if this is sufficient. All right, well, there you have it. Seems adequate. All right, there you have it. 2 stakes holding down the Plash Palatka, which is tonight my tarp underneath my hammock. Which, fun fact, sleeping in hammocks was actually the standard way that NVA and Viet Cong would sleep in the field. They wouldn't carry tents, they would carry field hammocks. That was also what they used as hospital beds often, were hammocks. Just to function the fact that, you know, Vietnam is a very rainy country and hammocks are an easy way to stay off the ground. All right, let's start chopping away with some light firewood. Easy. All right, a little bigger, no problems there. All right, let's step it up. Let's see how it does with something like this. Okay, that was easy. Now normally I would just break this thing off with my foot, but we're here to test this thing. There we go. All right, you didn't see what happened when I did the YJQ 308. That thing snapped in half when I tried to cut a branch about this thick. And you saw this thing, this just kept working. So I think there's a clear victor, which you guys know, it's the old school coming up on top again. All right, let's see. All right, let's try to do this big dog. So I can definitely feel the fact that it's concave. The power when you bring it down in a big chopping motion, you can feel it wants to jerk in your hand because the direction is getting twisted. This may be too much of a log for this, but let's see. No, it was not. Look at that. That thing cut right through that. All right. Well, there you go. You want a winner? You got a winner right there. All right, guys. Well, overnight's complete. Gotta say, Plash Palatka, low-key the MVP of the night. It did drizzle on me, at least intermittently throughout the night, but I stayed dry using the Palatka as a tarp. However, on to the main event. The entrenching tool. What's the verdict? Man, I think old school, in this case, is the best school. The fact that this is a single piece of steel wrapped around a hunk of wood is just, there's a reason this design lasted for 100 years. There's nothing wrong with it. It works great. You grab this metal part and you have an excellent chopping function. You can continually sharpen this blade up as sharp as you need it to be. If you really want this to function as a knife, undoubtedly a little bit of elbow grease and a knife sharpener would get you there. The handle's simple, easy to use, right? It really generates a lot of power. This dug out the fire pit so quickly. I was just totally impressed, absolutely impressed with this. You know, you compare it to the YJQ 308 and it's a classic case of when you over design something, everything becomes a liability. The YJQ, you had a joint right here, which meant that even if you wanted to use it to chop anything, you're gonna put a ton of strain on that joint work. This, there's no joint, single piece of steel, all the way through, all the way around the handle. So again, if you're looking for a small, simple entrenching tool that you can put to use on your backpacking trips, this is an excellent option. I don't even put this in the backpack. I slide it through some of the loops and it just rests on the outside. You can also buy aftermarket sheaths for this that should let you strap it to the outside of a backpack. Anyway, guys, I'm packing up here. My coffee's heating up and then I'm hitting the road. But thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if there's any other gear you want to see me check out. I've got a lot on order this summer. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna be taking a huge road trip, going all over the country, and I'm gonna be taking all sorts of gear with me. So hopefully you guys are gonna see some exciting content coming up here shortly. And until next time, I'll see you guys on the trail.